Welcome everybody to U and UX, the relationship you probably didn't know you needed. My name is Caitlin Gerke. I am our UX research lead here at Northwoods.
And I'm Jenna Dean. I'm the UX practice lead here at Northwoods, and I do a lot of our design work and prototyping.
Awesome. And we're going to be talking about UX today, talking about things that can be helpful to help you improve the UX on your websites and learn more about UX for your projects going forward. So when we talk about developing a website, there's a lot of friends you have to keep in mind. You've got your marketing team and your sales teams that are, trying to, have the things that they need represented on the website. You've got your branding you have to worry about. You've got accessibility, which we'll talk about next. We've got content and development, and all of that can just be so much to keep in mind when you are trying to build a website, trying to optimize a website going forward. So there's just a lot you have to keep in mind. What we want to talk about today is your new BFF, the one kind of thing that can help make all of that easier as you're going through the website redesign process, which is user experience. Now, kind of making sure that your website is optimized for users and the process behind learning about your users and optimizing your site for your users. Now, UX is short for user experience, as a lot of you probably know, but it's really more than just the idea of user experience. It's what we like to think of it as is the combination of research and design, which is why you've got me from the research side and Jenna from the design side here. On the research side, we look at things like what users actually need on a website, what it is that they're looking for when they come to your site, and how can we get data that tells us what it is that they need when they come to your site. We're also looking at what's working on the site, and not just technically, what's working from in terms of content, that's meeting users' needs. And also what isn't meeting the needs of users when they're coming to the site, and how can that be improved? On the design side, we're looking at then bringing that to life. Once we know what users need, how can we lay out the page in a way that is accessible to them, that makes sense for what they're trying to do? And how do we optimize the web design of the site in general to meet those branding needs as well? So what we're going to talk about today is kind of going through the different things that we look at in terms of website UX. So we'll talk first just about a general website redesign and how you can use research and design together to set up a successful redesign and set up success going forward. We'll talk about design specifically, how it's more than just pretty colors, how content influences design, and how page layout can make a website user experience really work better. And then we'll talk about kind of what to do once you've already launched your website. UX isn't something that just kind of ends once the site is launched. It's something that you can be doing on an ongoing basis, and that you can, do different things to help make sure your site is successful in the long run as well. So let's talk about that redesign. And one thing I should also say is that throughout talking about all these things, we're going to be giving real examples of clients that we've worked with and how they were able to implement a lot of these things to help make a successful website going forward. So talking about a redesign to start off. So let's talk a little bit about what is UX research, because that's really what's going to come into play throughout a lot of this presentation. The goal of a UX research is to understand the needs and the challenges that your users are facing, what it is that they're struggling with, and how we can best meet their needs on your site. We also want to understand your website performance, what pages people are going to, how long pages are taking to load, things like that to help us understand what that experience is for users when they come to your website. We also want to back up any assumptions. Typically, we come into a redesign in particular with a lot of assumptions about your website. Like we know that our users care the most about this part of our website, or we know that people are coming to our site to get this information. Well, that's a great assumption, but we want to make sure that that's true. So we want to make sure that we have data that supports that. And finally, we want to use this to generate ideas on how to meet those needs. Figure out what it is about what those users are doing on your site and how we can best meet their needs going forward. A big thing that we look at when we talk about UX research is aligning what users want from your site with what a website owner, what you building the site actually wants to get out of your website. What we've often found, not always, but often, they aren't always the same. You might go into a website redesign thinking about, again, those things that we talked about at the beginning, branding needs, things that you want to, products you want to push, initiatives that you want people to know about. But that might not always align with what users are actually coming to your website to do. So we want to make sure we can meet both needs. We want to make sure the user's priorities are accentuated on the site. We want to make sure that, they can do what they need to do, but we also want to make sure that your needs are met as a brand as well. And how do we get data that shows whether that's working or what might need to change to best meet that in the future? How we do that is we get data. On the UX research side, we're basically a bit of data junkies. We like to, get as much data as we can that best supports, what it is that users are doing and how we can best meet their needs. So we do a combination of data from a website, so Google Analytics, heat map tracking, which I'll show an example of in just a minute, and just other website data, SEO data, things like that we can gather that gets us an idea of how a website, is being used. But also user data, talking to users, running surveys, running focus groups, doing types of user testing, all things we'll talk about today that help us to better understand what users need and how they're using your website today. So we're going to start off with our first, we're calling mini case study that shows how we think that UX data and UX design can work together to make a really successful website. And we're going to be talking about a site called SRS, Scoliosis Research Society. And for them, when they launched their site, we're going to go back to those audiences. The big piece of UX is understanding audiences. And for them, they had two very distinct audiences. They had doctors who were doing scoliosis research and working with patients with scoliosis, and patients who actually had scoliosis and their families who are looking for information about their disease and what they can expect from their treatment. So we started talking to people, in particular doctors, and surveying patients and understanding what it is these different types of users really needed from their website. And like you would expect, we got very different results from these two different audiences. The doctors told us, we want to know when your upcoming meetings are for the society. And I want to go read journal articles that are educational that tell us about the treatments out there. Patients said, I'm looking for a doctor who can help me, and I want treatment help. I want to, get help with treatment or learn about the things that my daughter is going to go through. Very different things, but very important needs that we wanted to make sure both audiences could reach on their site. In addition, the fun thing about user research is that you can also identify problems you maybe didn't even know existed. So in this case, this with the finger pointing is me, but I asked, do you listen to the podcast? They had a podcast that they had on the site, and I wanted to know, if that was getting used. And the most common answer we got was, what podcast? So for us, it was a common thing of, this is out there. It's a great resource, but we want to make sure people know it exists. And how can we use the website as a tool people are already going to make sure that they're aware of the resources that are available to them? Because in this case, there were so many cool resources that just kind of got lost in the jumble of the website. So that was the user research side of things we talked about. Now let's talk a little bit about the data. And one thing that we love to do is called heat maps. This is an example of some heat maps that we ran on the site. And what they are is they show basically hot and cold zones of where people are interacting with a page. So they might show where a mouse moves around the page. That's what the very first one in the left-hand column is showing. They might show how far down the page someone is scrolling. That's what the middle one is showing. So the top gets lots of eyes on it, and slowly it turns blue as people don't scroll down the page. And then finally, we can do heat maps that show clicks. So where someone is actually clicking on the page to show us if they're actually clicking on the important calls to action we want them to. And this for us confirmed, we could see what pages people were focusing on, how far down the page, and we could see that people weren't accessing the data and the information on the site that we wanted them to be able to see. They weren't seeing the things we wanted them to, so that led us to a lot of different things we could do to help that be fixed in the future. The biggest one was we need two sites. There are two very different audiences. They want completely different things. So in this case, we recommended a site for the doctor audience, a site for the patient audience that we could then customize to their particular needs, since there wasn't really an overlap in what type of information they were looking for. We could also, in just a second, Jen is going to show you, do a lot with customizing the look and feel to make sure that the feel of those sites fit what that audience was looking for as well, which Jen will talk about in just a minute. So I'll pass it over to Jenna.
All right, thanks, Caitlin. So designing to kind of take that next step in their journey. So Caitlin Sitemap does a wonderful job of accommodating those needs. So you'll see here we have information on the different conditions, the diagnosis and treatment. We even have this whole resource section here. So the sitemap does a really great job to help get the patients that information that they need. We also have this giant call to action here of finding a specialist, and it's also up here in the utility nav as well. So we're definitely addressing those concerns for the patients right up front that we weren't able to do on the primary or the original site design. You'll also notice that I have this bright green color palette, and we have a brighter green accent down here. The images really focus more on that patient to doctor relationship. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see I have a lot of fun iconography. We have some fun bold shapes here that further bring out that color palette. And then when we scroll down a little bit more, we have patient stories, and we have this like vector artwork down here. So you might be wondering, why did you make the website so fun? It's so vibrant and a little bit even playful. And it's really meant to put those patients at ease. They recently could have received what is a potentially alarming diagnosis, and we wanted the website to feel welcoming, inviting, and kind of engage them to explore without feeling overwhelmed about a potentially alarming diagnosis. So that was kind of the point of the design, and a lot of the imagery, again, just focuses on that doctor care. So it really just helps calm them and allows them to explore and get the information that they need. You'll also notice here that these icons are really nice. They're fun to look at, but they're also a little bit informative too. They help give just a little bit of additional information to these different conditions that we're looking at, which is something that would have been harder to do with actual photographs. So it was just a nice way to kind of complex medical terms in a quick view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this scoliosis page. So again, we have a lot of great content here, of people that are looking to learn, for patients or, people with loved ones that have been diagnosed. What is scoliosis? How can you check for it? Giving a lot of information here. There's different types of it. So if you wanted to explore a little bit further what type you may be dealing with, a little bit of description text here to kind of get you in the right place, get you in the right direction quickly. And then another really great add-on is these frequently asked questions here, because these users have a lot of questions. And if you're able to answer them pretty quickly like this, you're immediately making them feel empowered and educated. So that's a really great tool and technique to help those people that are trying to learn more about something. And then down here, we do end with a dual call to action, because we're not quite sure where this user is in their journey. Are they ready to take the leap and find that specialist and get started on their journey? Or are they trying to learn more about this experience for a loved one? And so they might want to instead read up more on patient stories of people that have gone through this similar experience and what that looked like for them. We're helping the users with these dual calls to actions, further engage with the website, further engage with the content, and really go where they need to go next. So on the other end here, we have the doctor site, which you can tell immediately has a very different tone. We have images here of like conventions, we have x-rays, people presenting. The colors here are a little bit more professional. It has a little bit more of a corporate feel to it, which is what these users expect. And Caitlin pointed out that what the doctor's primary concerns that they wanted to find on the website was information on the journals, which we have featured here in the navigation, as well as meetings and conferences, which is also up here. Feature those on the home page as well, towards the top of the page, with images to kind of enhance where all these meetings are going to be happening. And then we have the journal information down here as well with news. And then another piece of information that came up during that UX research part of the presentation was that they didn't know that podcast exists. So what else did they not know was there? So instead of just having a simple stripe or call to action that said, hey, view our access our education materials, click here, we wanted to really show the depth of resources that were available to them so they didn't continue to miss that. So it's like, hey, we have podcasts, we have webinars, we have videos, we have manuals and presentations, we have questionnaires, we have all these different education materials at your disposal. So we really just wanted to make sure that we outlined exactly all of the information that they were able to access. And then in addition to that, medical sites and among other industries can be very, very content heavy. And so you still want to create a design that's easy for the users to scan the content and get the information that they need. So I'm actually going to go to the Become a Member page. So here, to become a member for SRS, we have this apply online, application deadline information, some PDFs that help them along with that application process. But if they're not quite ready to apply and they want to learn a little bit more about the membership, they can scroll down the page here. And then we have these nice card styles that just outline all of the different benefits of becoming a member. This could have just been a bulleted list, but that's not as engaging. It's not as visually appealing. So we just wanted to make a design that was easy for them to get the information, easy for them to scan, and still looking really nice. And then we have that apply online button down here again as well. But if they're still not ready to become a member and they need a little bit more information on the membership type, they can scroll down to get all of that information. And you can see there's 4 different types of membership. So we put these in tabs because you can see there's a good amount of content for each of these membership types. And the original design actually had all of this on a single page listed out. So it could be really hard to scan through all that content to find the information you need, especially if maybe you are already a member, but you forgot what your membership requirements were. Instead of having to navigate through all that content, you can simply go here and click on the tab that applies to you, so you don't feel so overwhelmed at the amount of content that there is. And then down here, we also have another apply online button. So you might be like, why do we have 3 apply online buttons on the page? And again, it's because you want to make sure that that conversion is really easy for your user and you're not quite sure when they're ready to convert. So we have one at the top of the page here for those users that already immediately know that they want to become a member. So instead of having to scroll down to that call to action, it's right here at the top of the page. They can immediately start their application process. But for those users that need just a little bit more convincing, we have the benefits of becoming a member. And maybe that is enough and all they needed to know to convert. So instead of having to scroll back up, they just can click this button down here. And then same, if this isn't quite enough information, they need to learn a little bit more about the membership types and requirements, then they're able to apply again down here instead of having to scroll up. So you want to make these users as easy as possible without making them think too much about it, and just make it feel really natural and intuitive. All right, so with that, I will hand things back to Caitlin.
All right, let's go back.
Quick question.
Mhm.
Question from the audience. Of those all those different apply online buttons, which one got the most clicks? Did you have any follow-up research on that?
Not on that specifically, but
Repeat
actually,
the question. I'm not sure if we heard.
yes, that's a good call. So the question was basically if there was any data we have so far on which got the most clicks, and we don't have data on that, unfortunately, right now. But that's a nice segue into my next slide, which is the data that we do have right now. So some of the data that we have. Well, the immediate impact of it was that the original site just had a lot of pages. And really too many for what they were trying to do. And that was part of the problem why people didn't know so much existed, because everything was so scattered. So immediately post-launch, we went from 1,700 total pages to 187. Really, by the time we got through going through everything, combining things together, that was really all that was necessary to show the exact same information in just a much more concise way, making it much easier for people to navigate the site and find what they're looking for. The other thing that we can see is, so we had some heat maps running as to what types of calls to action people were clicking on. And what we were able to see was that both different groups were able to find the information that they were looking for. For one, we saw the member login, which is a whole separate thing we didn't talk about today, was getting access by members. They were finding what they were looking for. We could also see that they were regularly clicking on things like meetings and conferences and the other stuff that we wanted them to find out about, as well as we did have a link to that patient site on the main website, which we saw was also getting clicks. So we could see that the patients were able to find the content that they were looking for and get to the website that met their needs as well. And hopefully we'll get even more data like that in the future. Yeah.
Does that affect SEO when you take that many pages down? Do they lose any SEO advantage?
That's a great question. So the question was, when you reduce the amount of pages like that, how does that impact SEO? And it can, but not always in a bad way. You know, every time you're changing content and reducing content, you have the chance to impact SEO because, you know, Google is looking at your website to see what content is on it to decide, you know, whether or not it should show you in the results or not. But another thing that Google is looking at is user experience. So Google wants to send people not just to websites that can answer the question, because there's probably thousands, if not millions of sites sometimes that can answer the same question that someone's asking, but they also want to send people to good websites. Google doesn't want to get known as a reputation sending users to sites that don't work well, that are hard to navigate, that have, you know, bad content on them. So what we've often found is that basically anytime you launch a website, your SEO takes a dip temporarily because Google's trying to relearn who you are. But typically over time, especially with effort focused on SEO and on UX, it grows up and ends up being better and more focused on what you want it to be in the long run, as long as you do it right. So it can, but not usually a bad thing. Any other questions? All right. Let's hop on to our next topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about UX design in particular. And what we'll often talk about is that UX design is more than pretty colors. And the example I like to give with that is kind of going back to our whole idea of that we're Northwoods. And imagine that you are taking a walk in the forest and it's beautiful fall day like it is today, and you're looking at all the beautiful, pretty fall leaves and looking at all of that stuff, and you're enjoying the view. Well, as you're walking, your path gets a little bit rocky and it's suddenly hard to follow the path that you're walking on. It's taking twists and turns and suddenly you're lost in the forest and the view is great, but you have no idea where you are and don't know how to get out again. That's a beautiful design site with terrible UX. And really what we want to do is make sure you don't get lost in the trees. But we want to do the things and put in the effort to make sure that your site not only looks good and is on brand and looks the way that you want it to and people love the design of it, but also that it works, that the pages are designed well, that it's easy for users to find what they're looking for. And we have a few different ways that we're going to talk about doing that. The first that Jenna's going to be covering is content design. And she's going to talk a little bit more about what that is and how we like to focus on content design and why we think it's so important, why it's often forgotten in a lot of cases. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about prototype testing, which is sort of the next stage of making sure that your content really is a good fit for your users. So talking a little bit just about content to start off. For us, from what we've seen with websites, is that content is often forgotten. Really, whenever you're building a site, content is typically the biggest time commitment. That you spend all this time, we do all this great research, we get this beautiful design site, and then it's time to write content on the pages, and it just slows everything down because it's just forgotten that it's such a huge part and such a huge commitment to getting the site launched. And often it's underestimated. It takes often much longer than anyone even thinks that it will to get the content to a place that you want it to. It also, as Jen is going to show in a second, can really make or break the final design of your site. How those pages are laid out and making sure pages are laid out in a way that's effective is so important in making sure that the overall user experience on your site is one that is going to meet the needs of your users. And like I just said, it greatly impacts the overall user experience. So I'm going to let Jenna take it away with a couple of examples of content design here. Oh, yes, I can.
Right. So again, content design is more than just making the pages look nice. You want to make them work for your users, have the content available that your users need and are looking for. And you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of dead ends on your website. You want to keep your users engaged by having calls to actions implemented throughout the pages. And then you also want to make sure your content is organized and structured so users can easily scan through the content and quickly find what they're looking for. So I am going to click on this example of a can manufacturing company called Vobev that we did some content work for. Okay. Just give it a second. Okay. So immediately, Vobev had really striking images. The images were so great for their brand, pulled out the color palette, and were just really fun to work with. But when we scroll down this page, you'll notice that we have a nice quick summary of what can manufacturing is, a fun image that introduces unique shapes and contours to the design. But then we immediately get to the footer. So we don't have a call to action here that keeps the user engaged with the site. We have a really nice quick synapse of what can manufacturing is, but is that enough information for this user, especially if they're evaluating us to potentially, or evaluating Vobev to potentially work with them in the future. So instead, we actually did content development work for them. And you'll see same beautiful image at the top. We have that same description here with can manufacturing added filling to the heading there to give them that quick summary of what it is. But then when you scroll down the page, we further talk more about how it works. So to get started, you're probably starting at a separate point. You're either creating a new product or you already have an established brand. So where you're starting might vary. So if we hover over creating a new product, we get additional information on how to get started and where to focus our energy versus if you have an already established brand, where you need to get started and work on there. Really great about this approach is what I always say is so wonderful about websites is you have the ability to add movement. You have the ability for your users to further engage with your content, and that's great. And that's what sets it apart from like print design. So you should definitely find ways to take advantage of allowing users to interact with your content this way. And then if we scroll down, we have these dots here, and we saw them up here as well. And it helps guide the user's eye down the page, as well as just shows them that no matter where you start, the next part in the process is can manufacturing, and then we also take care of the can filling and the shipping. We have another more fun images here to enhance the brand. We're giving the user additional information outside of just what can manufacturing and filling is, but we elaborate on what that process looks like, which is definitely helpful information for users who are vetting whether or not to work with OBEV. And then we have a nice form at here ready to convert. Give us your contact information and we'll be in touch and we can get the process started. So this was just a important piece in showing, making sure that you don't have those dead ends and you're providing all of the content necessary for those users to evaluate potentially working with you or reaching out. All right. And so then on the other hand, we had this government website, SewerPak, that had a little bit of the opposite problem where they had a lot of content. So we needed to figure out ways to break up a large amount of text in ways that was still digestible to the user, easy for them to scan, and just have techniques to ensure that the long pages are just understandable. And then an added level of complexity to this design was that they did not have a lot of imagery. And they didn't want a design that was very image heavy because they knew they wouldn't be able to maintain that. And so I needed to come up with ways to break up large amounts of text that did not rely on a lot of imagery. So I will open up this prototype as well. And immediately on the homepage, they had some imagery. So you see we have this beautiful image up here to get the page started in the hero section. But as we scroll down the page, you'll notice that we only have one image. Everything else relies on color blocking, iconography, logos, bold buttons, and then we add kind of this grid pattern here and here, as well as here, is just little embellishments. So we really did take it to heart that they did not want a very image heavy website, but they did have a lot of content, so we had to find other ways to help break it up. So if we go to an interior page here, you'll notice that we're not starting with an image. We didn't want them to have to find an image for every single page. So again, we're just using color blocking with this blue color up here, have the heading, and then bringing in that color palette they have with the iconography. And then when we get to a really content heavy page, I kid you not, I received a 9-page single-spaced Word document of content that needed to go on this page. And I can't use a lot of images, so I had to rely on other tactics to make it still user-friendly to all of their users, as well as just make it scannable. So there's a 2-column layout here, and you'll notice that on the left side here, we do have a lot of content. And what's really great about this 2-column layout is it immediately makes the width of this content more readable. If you have long content that spans 1,200 pixels or more, that can be really hard to read because your eye has to jump and work a lot jump back a lot further to start the next sentence. So when you can condense your content like this, the readability of it definitely improves. And then we had this contact information, committee information, reports, and the sign up for newsletter in this column over here, which was originally buried within the content of over here. So I wanted to pull that out because if somebody's simply looking for contact information or information to download reports, we wanted to make sure that was up top and easy for them to see. So then you'll notice too that we have large headings here, which is great. It stands out a lot more from the content. And then we added this little rectangle embellishment too to really set those headings apart. So when you're scanning through the content, you can just look at those headings, find them really easily, better hone in on the information that you're looking for. Again, icons are a great substitute to images, and it's a really nice way to pull out your colors, especially with SewerPak, who had a really nice color palette to work with. And then I did not want to completely remove the use of images because they did have a little bit. They just did not want to leverage it throughout the whole design. So here we do have a nice image with content to highlight that area of content. But let's say they don't have an image. You can still use color blocking here to add emphasis to an area of content. And it's also a really great way to break up the content as well. And then another fun thing to work with for content lists Lists are great for scannability, and they can also be fun to decorate. So instead of just using a circle bullet, we have these arrows here that still allows this design to feel like it has been designed and not just thrown on here. And same with the numbered list here. So here we have the numbers a little bit larger. We're introducing the color blocking, and this really helps break up that content so it doesn't feel like you're just reading a 9-page single-space Word document. And then again, different ways to call out text. Maybe we don't have an image. Maybe we have an icon that we want to use instead. And then another really missed opportunity that I do realize a lot of people do is they leave their statistics buried in the content. Statistics is such a great thing to pull out and highlight, and you can do a lot of fun things with the design in order to help break up the text and draw attention to what are usually very powerful stats that you have. And furthermore, you can even add movement to these. So you can have that when the user scrolls down to it, that number count where it goes from 0 to whatever your statistic is, and it draws attention to the eye, breaks up the text, and it really just highlights important stats that you might have. And then here we end with a bulleted list. And you might notice that I don't have a call to action down here to kind of keep the users further engaged with the content. But that's because the goal of this page is really to give the users the content. We're not really trying to evoke any action from them. We just want them to get all the information that they need. And the page doesn't not have any calls to actions. They're just up here more at the top of the page. So if they do need to reach out for additional contact information, that is available to them. All right. Caitlin, I'll hand it back to you.
All right.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, perfect. So lots of ways that you can organize pages to best, meet the needs of users. But let's say we've done all this work. You've done a lot of work to make sure these pages are laid out well. Well, how do we know that they actually do meet the needs of users? We can use all the best practices in the world, but in the end, users are all unique. Your audience is going to be unique, and sometimes best practices aren't the best needs for the users at the end of the day. Well, we have one more kind of tool in our wheelhouse that we can use to help test out the effectiveness of a design, and that is called user testing. In particular, in this case, we're going to talk about prototype testing, and we're going to talk about it in the context of a website that we've been working with called Durham County. Really, what user testing is we're going through the process of testing the usability of certain tasks on the prototype. So we're getting actual feedback from users about content, about the design, about the organization of the site, and asking them to complete tasks within the prototype to learn how valid these designs actually are. We do this prior to a website launch. So it would be sort of as these pages have been built in a prototype tool, we go and we do some testing to see how valid they are before we actually start building it. With the goal being, we can improve the design, we can make little tweaks before we actually start developing the site, and things get a little bit more costly to fix. So we're fixing some of the possible UX concerns before we actually even start developing the site at all. So how this process works is we use an online tool. We like the tool Playbook UX, but there's a ton of tools out there that we can use to do this type of testing. And how it works is we have a group of people that we use the tool to gather, meeting certain demographics that we want to target. And they log on and we ask them, to complete a task. So in this case, it's if we have the question of how easily can people find a certain page within our new design and navigation we have set up, we then give them the task of, okay, use this prototype, use this, mock-up of a site to get to a page that we want them to access. We then have videos that we watch of them actually doing that task in our prototype, and we can see what worked, what didn't work, where they got stuck, which things they did easily, which they didn't do easily. And then we can ask them follow-up questions, and we can learn more about what experience they had doing these important tasks on the website. So again, it's a way of learning about how our prototypes are set up and how they're working before they even actually, build anything at all. So I want to give the example of Durham County. And in particular, I want to focus a little bit on navigation. Navigation is something that we look at a lot, as well as design and things like that in these types of projects. And what I want to focus on with this project is the different changes we made from this testing and how it improved the design. So with Durham County, they have kind of an interesting navigation. I'm actually going to bring up the very first prototype that we made for them, which is this right here. We've got a nice video that will probably start playing here. But does it not want to play? Let's just refresh the page. There we go. So we've got a home page here, some nice kind of calls to action, things like that. But I'm actually going to focus right at the top of the page here. And if we go over to departments, we get a listing of all of the different departments within this county government entity. And if you pay attention to kind of what the navigation is on the homepage, we've got this nice kind of drop down for tasks that someone might want to do, some residence, business focused thing. And if we go into, say, this department here, that navigation actually changes. That's because each department has their own unique needs, their own unique content. They almost have their own unique like mini websites within the overall website, because they have so many things that they need people that come to their site to be able to do. So we have it so the navigation changes, and there's actually, you can get back to the main menu by hovering up in the corner. So this is a wildly different navigation than what a lot of people are used to. And our theory was that we think this is going to meet the needs of users. But obviously, with such a wild thing that we're doing, we want to have data to back that up. Again, our whole team is very no assumptions. Let's get some real data that shows us this is a good way to go. So this is where prototype testing comes in. So let's hop back over to our presentation here. So we had a lot of tasks that we ran, but the ones I'm going to focus on right now are navigation based. We started them on the home page of the prototype, and we said, get to this department page. And we gave them no other context. We just said, get to this department page. In theory, that should be pretty easy. Click departments, click the name of the department, kind of a straightforward path. Believe it or not, everybody did it completely differently, which is always good. They all got there in the end. So that was great to know. But then the real kind of question, once you're on that department, go to a different department. They had to know that they had to go up to that county menu in the top corner, click on departments, because if I go back, because I think that's good to call out. If I go back here, if I go over, I think I can go here. If I go up to this county menu, there's a link to those departments again. So they can get back to that. They also can get to the homepage and all that kind of stuff. So do they know that that's a valid path? We wanted to make sure that that was something that was intuitive for users, that we weren't just assuming people would find it, that there was actual data behind this showing that this was a valid path and that this was a good way of organizing the website. So we started with that first one. And what I was showing you was our very first iteration. And we had that blue box that said county menu. And some people found it, but this was an actual quote from a user from that first round of testing was, this is tricky. I'm looking for all the listings of the county. I don't see it. And we're like, oh no, what do we do now? How do we make sure that's right? But the common thing we were seeing is that people would eventually find it, but they didn't see it right away. The blue kind of blended in too much to the blue background. So we're like, okay, let's run them through basically the same tasks with the same kind of, not the exact same users, but the same audience demographics. In this case, basically Durham is in North Carolina, people in North Carolina. But let's change it to purple. Let's see if that draws just enough attention to it. And it was much easier for people from that first round, but it still took them a little bit to know what that menu was. So this is a comment again from a real user. It took me a little bit to navigate between departments, but once I realized that it wasn't with the department's navigation, it was pretty easy. So they were seeing the county menu, but they didn't know that it was going to bring them back to the department switcher. And that's really what most people were using that navigation, that county menu for, was to go between departments. So we're like, okay, let's make it really, really obvious. We're going to make it purple, and we're going to make it say switch departments. Super easy. Everyone did it immediately. They immediately knew that's where I go. And literally this was someone just talking through their thoughts as they did it, because most people didn't even make comments. They're just like, oh, I just go here. And this was literally someone just going, I assume I just click switch departments. Yep, that was easy. So really that iteration of going through it was able to show us that maybe that first version wasn't the best way of doing things. But as we went through the different processes, we could show that we were able to make that user experience better and make it something that's really valid for people and also really met the needs of the business. Again, meeting the needs of the users, meeting the needs of the business at the end of the day. And we had real data to back it up that this is a valid way of doing this. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, we did a ton of testing. I'm only calling out a couple things we did here. But another thing that I thought was really interesting was that departments listing page I showed you. Big list of all the departments. They have about 30 departments. So it was something it's a big alphabetized list. And a concern that actually Jenna brought up as we were going into this testing was, well, do we need some sort of a search or something on this page? And we started to talk through it and we're like, well, what if someone doesn't actually know the name of the department they're looking for? What if they just know it's something to do with this or something to do with that? This alphabetized list isn't going to be actually all that useful for them if they don't know what the title is that they're looking for. So I made a few of the testers a little angry because they all kind of thought I set them up to fail. But I asked them to navigate to the county's health department, knowing full well it's called public health. So everybody went to H, thinking that that's where they'd find it. It was not there. They had to scroll down the page. People are like, well, if you would have told me that it was called public health, I would have found it right away. Well, that's the point. I think it's pretty, it very much is a use case that someone might not know that it's called public health as the name of the department versus just calling it the health department. So in our final version of this, there's now a search bar. Someone can just type in health. It'll pop up for them, regardless if they actually know the name of the department they're searching for. So we love prototype testing. I think it is one of the coolest things that we can do with prototypes to really get data about whether or not these little things are, whether they work for users. Oftentimes it's little stuff like that. Tweaks here and there, renaming things, changing colors of things, all of which can greatly improve the user experience at the end of the day just by running a couple tests to validate that with data. So really cool to think about if you're thinking of making changes to pages. It's a great way to kind of get some data on that. And we'll talk actually a little bit more about user testing in this next section as well. Yeah.
So what method did you use for user testing? Maybe you get that in the next section, but did you use a service? Did you use real life people at the county?
Yeah, so the question was basically what were the exact methods that we used to do that user testing? And there are a lot of ways you can do it. We prefer the tool Playbook UX, where it basically allows us to select a demographic of people that they have within the Playbook UX tool network, that it then finds people that meet those demographics and gives them our test. So for that test, it was, I believe, adults, I think we said 24 to 65 in North Carolina, because Durham is located in North Carolina. So we didn't narrow it down to the county itself just because we were a little nervous of not getting enough people. So, but I believe each test had 8 people and the industry standard is only 5. Typically you can get statistical significance with that testing in about 5 to 10 users. So it can be a really cool way to do that. So yeah. Yeah, you had a question?
When you're building out those test sites, are you building out like the entire site, or are there like kind of dead ends that people are going to get to?
That's a great question. So the question was, we're building out the site. Do we build out the entire site in this prototype, or are there possible dead ends? There are possible dead ends. So the example I'll give in just a little bit is a site that we did, a test we did with a live site. So not a prototype. So in that case, it's not an issue. But for prototypes, yes, they're basically what we do is when we're redesigning a website, we are building these prototypes anyway. So we might build a couple of additional pages, but there definitely will be dead ends. And something that we have at the beginning of testing is a warning, basically, that this is a prototype. Not everything may function like a real website. Just know that that is expected, and just act as if you were going to be clicking on something anyway, and speak loud what you would like to see. And usually the testers are aware that sometimes it might be prototypes, and they're pretty good at saying, well, I would click here to do this. Another thing that we'll often do is give them tasks that they're more likely to succeed at. So a good example is the department we actually used for most of our was the tax administration department, because we built that page out as part of our normal prototyping. And one thing we wanted to see was on that homepage, there were lots of different ways to get to the tax administration department. It was in the content of the page. It was in, I think, the residents drop-down menu as well as departments. And knowing we were asking them to go to tax, we made sure all of those were linked up. Because we knew that they were going to likely try to click some of those things. We want to make sure those links in particular are linked up as well. So while there are dead ends, typically the way we structure it is to give them the best chance of not reaching those. It still happens, but they know it. And, we try and set them up for success and us up for success as well. Any other questions? All right. So you've launched your site. You've got a new website. Maybe you have an old website and you want to make some little changes to it. There's so much you can do with a live website to help make little tweaks and improvements to user experience through research and through design. So we're going to talk about a few of those to kind of wrap things up here. UX does not end at launch. We do all this great research, we launch the site, but your users' needs are going to change over time. And how do we make sure that there's still, research we can do and still things are still meeting your users' needs, even if you have a site that's been live for years? Things that can really make an impact on UX over time are things like adding new content. As Jenna showed, content plays a huge role in how your user experience is on your site. So if you add more, that can impact what's already there. Overall business changes. Maybe you've added a completely new product line. Maybe you've changed your, kind of how you're structured internally from a business. You want to make sure that people can find that about you on your site. Google search, SEO, how people are finding you. Maybe you've started ranking for a new keyword and now people are entering your site on a completely different page that they've never entered your site on before. How do we make sure that they can still get to the content you want them to get to? As well as things like technical updates. Maybe you've added new functionality, a new tool to your site. How do you make sure that that still fits in with your overall user experience? And then finally, staff turnover. Maybe the person who's had sort of the brain for the website for all these years has left. There's a new person, making sure that you kind of share that user experience goals and that you have an idea of what, how to best optimize for users as well. So these are a couple of things. We're going to talk about most of these in the couple of examples I'll show, but a few different ways that you can learn about UX from an ongoing perspective. One is that user testing, which we just talked about and we'll talk about even more. Sequential testing or sequential A/B testing, running basically different versions of a page to see how they get different types of traffic. There's one way you can kind of do some of that, as well as talking to users, running surveys, doing interviews. We'll talk about that as well. And then finally, just watching your website analytics, running heat maps, looking at Google Analytics, seeing where people are going and whether that's the pages you'd expect them to go on your site. So we've got a couple of mini case studies here to talk about that ongoing effort. The first is more about user testing, this time though with a live website. So this is not a site that was prototyped. This is a live website out there in the world for the Children's Hospital Foundation here in Milwaukee. And they wanted to get a little bit of data about how people are using their website and whether it was effective. So again, the goal of this is gather data on things like existing page layouts, content, and then just overall experience. Were people able to accomplish the tasks they wanted to them on the website? We did that by running some user tests. For this test, it was only 5 users. Again, that's kind of the industry standard for that. They were used that same tool, Playbook UX, to do that testing. In this case, they were users who were located in Wisconsin. Age 33 to 75 was the end kind of goal. I think we said over 24. 2 female, 3 male. And in particular with this group, we asked them to be people who identified as a parent. So a cool thing we can do with user testing is really narrow it down to the specific audience that we want for this testing to make sure that they're able to do what we want them to do on the site. There were a lot of tasks we gave them, and the goal of this was to basically do kind of a coverage of all the different things someone might want to do on the site, whether it was making a donation, learning about things from a business perspective, accessing content about what they do. We did all sorts of tasks that could help narrow it down to what it was that they wanted, all the different things someone could do on the site. Now, we're only going to talk about one task today, but I think it's a really telling one in terms of page layout. So they had this page that was talking about giving something in a will after the fact back to the foundation. And this is one of my favorite tasks we've ever run with user testing because it was just so interesting. In this page, they have lots of things going on, and they really wanted people to click on the blue box on the right side that says Start Today. That's where they want people to get the guide, to download that. That was the next step they wanted people to take on this page. So the natural test question is, well, go to this page. Where would you go next? If you wanted to learn more information, where would you click next to learn more? What we will really try to do with these tasks and with user testing is to not lead them in any way. So we basically don't tell them what we want them to do. We don't even tell them after the fact. We just say, what would you do when you go to this page? We wanted them to go to that box. So if we look at this page, of those 5 testers, 4 of them mentioned they'd click to learn more there. 3 of them mentioned they'd read through the next steps, maybe contact that person in the next steps. 2 mentioned that they might click to fund their donation and learn about kind of the different steps of what they would do next. 1 mentioned they download that resource, and 0 talked about the blue box. That's very telling. So there was a very clear way to say, that's not what people are seeing. What you want them to see is not where they're going. So what can we do to make this page work better? And that's when we bring Jenna in, and Jenna would do her magic of content design and say, let's move this over here. Let's try this here. And in an ideal world, we haven't done this, but in an ideal world, we'd redesign that page and then run testing again to see now what's the answer. Are they finding what we want them to find? And ideally they would. So I think it's just a really telling example of how powerful user testing can be to really, again, not go on assumptions. We want to really base things on data. And it's a really easy thing to just find out if things are working the way you want them to. In an ideal world, we would have seen everybody mention that box, and then we'd know that things are working the way we want them to. But in this case, maybe there's some changes we can make. The last kind of big case study I want to talk about here is bringing in the other big side of user research, which is users themselves, talking to people. And again, a really powerful thing you can do is actually reach out to users and ask them of their opinion on your site, on the issues, and how things have changed. And in this case, we're going to talk about some work that we did with CIBMTR, a medical research group here in Milwaukee, and learning about kind of user feedback on kind of learning about how people feedback from users about a year after launching their new website. They wanted to reach out to users, learn about what their thoughts were on the site after about a year later. The big reason they wanted to learn more is that this new site has very different navigation, very different content, very different design from their previous site. So they wanted to make sure that it was working the way that they wanted it to, and just hear some feedback from users about that new experience, making sure they can find what they're looking for, even with the brand new design and look and feel. How we did that is through surveys. We had sent out surveys, both internal and external users. We ran some heat maps again and did analytics research. And a big thing that we will often say with user research is that really, if you're only doing user research and not also only talking to users and not actually looking at hard data about your site, you're only getting half the picture. You really need to follow up any type of user research, any surveys or things like that that you're doing with other additional research, like heat maps, like analytics, to see what's all actually happening on your site as well. And that's because as much as we love users, they have a tendency to sometimes lie. Whether they mean to or not, they misremember what they usually do on the site. They just, are a little bit inaccurate. Maybe they're trying to save face and say, oh yeah, I visit your site all the time, when actually they're there maybe every couple months. So we like to always compare it against what we're actually seeing happen on the site, just to make sure that we're getting the full picture. So in this case, we asked people, why do you visit the website? And we were able to learn that people were finding the type of things that we wanted them to find, that the things that we had prioritized in the navigation and the structure of the site were the things people were coming to the site to get. So we were able to know that, what people were coming to the site for matched how we had optimized the navigation, which is great. We also can ask them questions like, well, how easily do you find stuff on the site? Again, this is a year later. They've been using the new website for a while. And so we can learn that, employees ranked it an 8 out of 10, external users ranked it a 9 out of 10. So great. We could see, again, some good data from users showing people are able to find what they're looking for. We also can get comments. We always like to kind of have at least some place in the survey that says, just tell us what you think about this thing. What is your experience like using the navigation? What types of things have you experienced? So we can get comments like this, like everything's laid out really logically. I've never had an issue finding things on the site, or I can find my way back where I came and find what I'm looking for. External users think it's really easy to locate things from the navigation menu, which is great, or that they're now using the search button, which wasn't something that they could really easily do on the previous site. Sometimes you also get improvements too, which we can take into consideration and help make the site better in the end as well. Another thing, looking at that user comments, and we got all these good comments about navigation, we can then take that and combine it with the actual data. Again, I always like to come back to the data at the end of the day. Users say they can find things pretty easily. Well, we can see that on the current site, 91% of pages are accessible in 4 clicks or less. Only 9% take more than 4 clicks to get to, which their site's very large. So 91% of pages in 4 clicks, that's pretty good. Kind of, again, showing that data behind the scenes that users say it's easy to use, and we've got the data to prove that it's easy to use from that perspective, at least as well. We also can look at heat maps again. So looking at heat maps, we see that things like a lot of the calls to action that we put at the top of the page are the most commonly clicked buttons on that page. So like Jenna was talking about earlier with content design, making sure that the calls to action are in the right place to meet the needs of those users. In this case, we can actually see that where we put the calls to action on the page are where people are going to get that content. They don't have to scroll all the way down the page to get what they're looking for. It's right at the top of the page. And from these click heat maps, we can actually see that there's big red marks on all the top of the page calls to actions. So for us, the call to actions are easily findable, they're in the right place, and they're the right calls to action to meet the needs of the users. Any questions on that before we wrap up? All right. So I hope this was a nice introduction to your new BFF, user experience. You can replace user experience with me and Jenna if you'd like. But really, user experience drives widespread success. I think that by focusing on user experience early in whatever project or whatever website effort you're working on, it can really help you set up for understanding what content you need, how to implement branding, how to meet the needs of both your internal teams as well as external teams, save you time in development with user testing, and just make the whole process a lot easier because you've got data that you're basing it on. Focusing on website UX helps you ensure that you've got those user needs front of mind, that you know what users want on your site, and you can make sure that their needs are met. It allows you to make those decisions based on data. So you aren't just using your assumptions or what someone sales guy says that is important. You've got data that prints and says that this is the way to go. You can balance those business needs, those branding needs with user need, and prioritize the issues based on the data and the impact of each of those individual things. So make UX your new BFF. You can conduct user UX research before any major website change to help you to do that. Remember that there are some design concerns when you're adding content, so definitely don't disregard the overall content design of a page when you're adding new content to it. Make sure at the very least you've got Google Analytics set up on your site, and even look into heat map tracking. Sometimes there's a lot of free tools out there like Microsoft Clarity that you can do heat map tracking just on an ongoing basis for free. And then finally, if your site's been up for a while, maybe consider doing some user research, some surveys, some interviews, some user testing, and really making sure that you've got that full picture of what's going on. And with that, we'll open it to any questions. Any other questions? I can check the chat too.
We will take, I don't think, there's some fun tip. When doing user testing, stay away from the words like new, updated, or improved.
Mm-hmm. We got blocked
You
here.
got blocked, yeah. When testing the new design of the new way to use it will reduce bias as the user will
Yes.
automatically say it's amazing, better, as a lot of people assume new equals better.
This is a great comment. So basically the comment says when doing user testing, stay away from using words like new or updated or improved because there's bias that's introduced. Basically, users will basically know that something is new and they'll know that that's the one that they should vote for, or they should praise that one in the design. 100%. Bias is a huge issue with user testing. You want to be as completely neutral as possible. An example of this is we did some user testing recently where we had a site that we were working on, and they were looking at basically the functionality and design of a competitor site. And they were wondering, do we do something similar to what they're doing on our site for our similar content? So we actually completely took the name of the website we're working with out of everything that we were doing. We called them option A and option B. And so we put no bias and we just asked users, do this task on the client that we were working with site, this class on the competitor site, which task was easier for you to use, and just said option A or option B and took all bias out of it so that we were more likely to get completely unbiased results with that. So yeah, you have to be really, really careful in the way that you phrase your tasks, the way that you write everything, or you might unintentionally skew the results in a way that isn't fair to your testing. Yeah, big, good comment. Anything else?
I don't see anything else coming in from out there in the wild. Anything in the room? Any questions? All right.
Thank you very much.